Welcome to the East Angle, a podcast about the East, broadly defined, exploring international relations, politics, and history. When time allows, we will also delve into world events and our shared passion for football. I'm Ra Mason, and this is my co-host, Sherzod Muminov.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the East Angle. Today we have a star lineup and a very diverse lineup of UEA people. We have our colleague, Dr Anuradha Sajjanhar, and we have one of our brilliant master's students, Pham Minh, originally from Vietnam, but currently studying for a master's degree in our politics school. So over to you, Ra.
Yeah, absolutely thrilled to have Anuradha and Minh with us. It's always a pleasure, and especially to have this combination. So this is the first time on the podcast we've actually got staff and students in a room so we can flesh out what is going on. And today we want to find out who rules the world. So straight away I'm going to throw that question to Anuradha.
Oh,
Good place to start.
that's a huge question. Okay.
You're an expert in this area, so I mean, there's a lot of things that we'd like to hear about. You've talked previously in your book about the role of kind of experts, but also the way in which ideology and economics and kind of technocracy all shape the way in which that translates from expertise to policy.
Yeah.
So could you maybe start? Maybe you could tell us a little bit about your book and then tell us how that helps us to answer this giant question.
Yeah.
It is a giant question. So I think a big thing about being somebody who studies experts and expertise is that the word starts to lose all meaning. And so I find it hard to call myself an expert in any area.
Expert in experts.
Yeah, it seems, very silly. My book looks at right-wing think tanks in Modi's India and kind of over time thinking about how what we conceive of as expertise and expert knowledge has changed, and how kind of political and technological change shifts that. So, a huge part of this really is that it's not really a decline in expertise, which is what a lot of people perceive kind of a populist pushback as being, but more about a transformation in what counts as expertise, who the experts are, and how it's mobilized in public life. Yeah.
Right.
Oh, it leads me to the question, just from memory, almost 10 years ago now, it's crazy. We had in this country, in the run-up to the Brexit vote, we had one of the ideologues, I don't know if I should use the word, but one of the people in the Conservative Party who was always very well known for his ideas, very powerful ideas, someone who actually came across as maybe one of the more genuine politicians of the last 10, 15 years. I mean, it's not that hard to be genuine among all of them, I guess. But anyway, what Michael Gove, in a famous quote, said when asked about expert knowledge in making an educated vote or making an educated kind of decision on what to vote for, he said, quote, "The British people have had enough of experts," end quote. So, unfortunately, when I look around, it's almost 10 years ago, I don't think that has changed. I don't think that experts' reputation has gone up, despite the fact that a lot of people, actually people who voted for Brexit, kind of realized that it was a big mistake. So what is your take on this? Has the time of experts passed in this post-truth world?
Yeah, I think that quote has become a real recurring soundbite over the last, I think it's 9 years ago now.
Yeah.
And it's interesting too, because it's not necessarily that governments who say that they've had enough of experts, they're still turning to private expertise and consulting firms and tech companies increasingly.
As long as it's private, it's okay?
Yeah, no, exactly. But I think that has more to do with kind of how expertise is relocated from kind of how we used to think of it as like universities, civil services, to corporate and technical domains, and often more behind closed doors. So I think that's a really big part of it. But I think our challenge isn't to necessarily revive this idea of a golden age of experts, but more to kind of develop forms of knowledge that are more transparent and plural and kind of inclusive and responsive within public life.
Okay, maybe I could bring Minh in on that as well then, because I feel like, as somebody who probably has a different take on the ideology behind all of this, the ideology of expertise almost, does it matter what the political system is? Because I think one of the things, Anuradha just alluded to, that the private sector is somehow given this special place and that government is expected to be incompetent and inefficient and so on. So, I mean, as somebody that grew up in a, at least nominally, socialist society, how is the role of expertise kind of embedded within that socialist ideology, or is it not?
Right. Maybe you can make an introduction because you can maybe tell us a little bit more about yourself before answering.
Yeah,
because
please
to
do.
just kind of create the context. Yeah.
Right. Well, I do grow up in a country where we have been experiencing a major transformation for the past 20 or 30 years economically. And the concept of expertise has gradually changed by then, right? So as I grew up, I was introduced to the concept of if you have the expertise, you have the authority, right? And in most cases, and I guess in countries in the same region as the ones that I live in, if you have expertise, it grants you a degree of authority whenever you enter the room. And that has changed for the past couple of years. With skepticism on the rise, people start to believe that, expertise is not, exclusive to people in ivory towers. And, they don't trust the experts as much as they used to due to the dilution of information being spread on social media, right? They still trust experts in intermediate or immediate in practical situations, right? Doctors doing illnesses, or engineers for infrastructure.
Try not to trust the cardiac surgeon. And tell him how to do his job. Or her job.
Yeah. Okay. So, but in that case, then it's not really having a very powerful effect in the sense that it doesn't matter then the political system. The role of expertise is basically similar, and you're seeing it eroded effectively because you no longer have this uniform authority, right? Because it's not being trusted.
Yeah, I kind of also sense from these two answers, very good answers, that we have some form of a conflict between this old school or traditional knowledge. Whether that knowledge came, in the old days, obviously, it came from the ivory tower, it came from the usually white male, but these days, not necessarily white, but males who knew how to tell you how the world runs, mansplain things to you if you didn't want.
I can still do a bit of that if you want.
Yeah, that's what we are kind of paid for with Ra. But then on the other hand, you have this kind of, on one hand, kind of very democratic leveling effect of social media where everybody can be an expert. If you don't like vaccines, you can do your own research, as they say. I've done my own research. But then there is that conflict between these two big trends, if you like. One traditional, where you trust someone who's spent years and years training for a high-paying job, that job that usually produces lots of knowledge for the society. On the other hand, you have the people who don't necessarily have that educational training, but feel that they have enough information with the mobile phones revolutionizing the transmission of information to the biggest number of people in history. So do you agree with that? And what are the implications of that big conflict?
Yeah. Anuradha?
Yeah, so I think it happens at two levels, really. One is kind of the producers of that knowledge, and two is at the consumption level. So I think, often post-truth is kind of what we come up with as where we're at with how people consume knowledge. But I think it's also kind of a multiplicities of truth. There's just so many different knowledge claims jostling for legitimacy, and we have many more platforms that allow us to do that.
Can you give examples of those?
Well, yeah, vaccine theory, conspiracy theories.
Conspiracy theories,
That's
okay.
really where it's kind of a full saturated marketplace for people who are looking for confirmation of something they might suspect, or, just kind of anything you look for, you will find, really, in many ways.
Yeah.
And then we're also looking then at the production and the infrastructures that govern that. So, I think the idea of this knowledge economy that was touted as like a policy buzzword in the 1990s, 2000s was really this very optimistic liberal hope for investing in education, innovation, right, information and knowledge production. But over time, you've seen that not really empowering workers or people who produce knowledge, but really kind of crumbling into gig work, precarity, things like social media, platform capitalism, and now AI has commodified knowledge to such a huge extent. where a lot more click-based economies have replaced what were promised to be kind of high-skill knowledge.
So this is super interesting because I think it again relates back to the political systems. So I, ask Min again on this. Isn't that where you have this happening, it's diversification? Isn't that when the government becomes the ultimate authority? So in a socialist system, isn't that one of the justifications? I mean, we might look back through time and think, the Soviet Union or People's Republic of China in its earlier formations were not ideal systems in terms of empowering the individual. But now, is it not the case that socialist systems might have more authority to provide expertise in that respect?
Right.
Or efficiency. I mean,
And
I will come back
both,
to that point.
Right?
Right. You have to talk about the current global relevance, right? But before we move on to that, I want to rephrase this particular concept that I learned about a couple of years ago. It's called the information action ratio, right? It was introduced by a cultural critic in his work "Amusing Ourselves to Death." So it's a relationship of the amount of information given to a consumer and what they're expected to do with it. So when it comes to the current global relevance, right, we have growing inequality in capitalist societies. We have climate change. We have young people increasingly interested in alternatives to capitalism, I would say. And the recent crises, especially during the COVID-19 pandemic, which demonstrate the importance of strong institutions, whether it's public or private, but I would argue that it's public institutions. So if you had to unpack what a socialist model really means, right? One of the things that I learned growing up was the idea of you have to emphasize on democratic participation, and you got to have innovative approaches. So I would say that many successful policies, you have universal health care, you got public education, you got progressive taxation, all of which are fundamentally taught in the ideas and the words of socialism, right? So in times of crises, because this is my experience growing up, right? For example, when it comes to vaccines, every mother in Vietnam knows that once their children is born into this peculiar world, one of the first things they had to do is to vaccinate their kids. Right. But I would never think, I know about the conspiracy theories and anti-vaxxers all around the world. I would never expect it to reach Vietnam, right? It's a place where, universal health care is a thing. And, we won't really have to care about
Can
that.
I ask you about this? Sorry to cut you off, but is this because these people trust the government with everything, with the dearest thing, like their child's health? Is this because of trust? Is this because of trust in the government? Is this because of trust in science? And if it's either of those or both, how is this then cultivated? How has this been cultivated?
But I think Min's about to tell us that actually there is vaccine hesitancy in Vietnam. Are you not?
There is.
Yeah, this is what was coming. Yeah, go on, go ahead.
Which is odd, because usually, as I mentioned earlier, right, if you have the knowledge and, if you have the information, you wield the power, you wield the authority. And science doesn't always translate to authority, but, I would say that there is an implication that there's a correlation of both. That authority knows, what to do best. Because when you grow up, who do you listen to? Your mother and your father, right? Who, as a kid, who rules your world? Mommy and daddy, right? As you grow up,
How much of that is Confucian?
Oh,
It's not socialist, it's not purely socialist. It's also Confucian. There's also the Confucian side to things, which, you see in Japan, you see in East Asia, where certain things, even in Japan, in this country that is, left the past, is so far behind in some respects.
Yeah.
You still have to listen to parental authority. You still have to listen to, say, religious authority.
right.
Yeah. I mean, you've talked about this, Anuradha, right? Religious authority, like Hinduism, right, definitely has an influence on that interpretation of expertise. No, there's a sort of kind of a religious authority there, which is actually enabling some of these things to have something more than just the fact that it's based in scientific.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the way that I talk about it is slightly different. It's about kind of Hindu nationalist expertise as kind of remaking ideas of the past and the future, kind of rewriting history and what India was like in the past, and and what it ought to be in the future. But if we're talking about religious kind of influence over scientific facts and how people kind of buy into that, a huge thing was drinking cow urine to ward off COVID. That was really widely accepted during. I say widely expected. I don't really know to what extent it was widely accepted, but a lot of people did believe it and do it.
Yeah.
And that's just kind of one of the examples of that.
Okay. Is Confucianism to answer or ask Sherzad's question for him again? Is it a powerful influence in Vietnam, or is that really is in other words? I think what Sherzad is getting at, and he can correct me if I'm wrong, is that this idea of government authority is actually a smokescreen for something that's much deeper and that's underlying that, which is this kind of religious authority.
You're answering your own question. Who rules the world?
Go on. Do you see that in Vietnam, or do you think really that Confucianism is at the very least, or at the very most, implicit? And
Well, on the essence of it, yes, because historically we were built on the concept that there is a hierarchy of social order, right? There is an authority who who takes you and leads you to places as a kid, and as you grow
Benevolent authority. It's really important.
That's the correct concept. Yeah, I like the way you phrase it, benevolent authority, because, for example, right, I would apply this with the current political system that I would see that's been going on in countries of similar fashion. So Marxist-Leninist theory requires that we adapt to socialism to each specific conditions of the country, right? And the difference between our political system versus other fellow socialist brotherhood countries is that we're guided by what's called Ho Chi Minh thoughts, right? It requires that we apply universal socialist principles creatively to Vietnamese realities. Like a certain professor has, instructed me in his theory class, we just don't throw in theories and stir, right? We don't.
You don't. Do not throw in stir.
Right.
Yeah.
So our, model reflects unique history, culture, and conditions. Confucianism was one of the guiding principles, not the guiding principle, one of the bases that constructed the society, the Eastern society, in, I guess, in that part of the world, in the eastern flank of Asia.
What we call Sinocentric world order.
Right.
Yeah.
I think
that's just one way of putting it.
Yeah. But it's also another important question, right? I mean, having said that, this is something that seems very. We've got a historian in the room, so he can definitely ask this part of it. But there's a historical issue here, right? Isn't all of this?
I'm here to ask the questions. Right?
Go for it. Yeah, you go for it. You ask the history question. Go on.
No. You go on. Sorry, I'm cutting you off constantly, but yeah, don't pay attention to me.
No. Well, it's exactly who we do want to pay attention to, because I think what you're suggesting here is that there's this kind of sinocentric order which has come from deep in historical development across the region, and Vietnam is positioned really as a recipient of that history.
I think, this leads us to the question about socialism more generally, because I am someone who was born in a socialist country, Soviet Union. I now live in a non-socialist country, but I also study it. And for me, it's really interesting what happens to socialism. And this is a question to both of you. You can talk about your own countries, or you can talk more generally about this, because India also had this very important role, initially as a non-aligned country, but also kind of friendly with. There were periods in history, which you will correct me if I'm wrong, when India was closer to the socialist bloc than to the so-called capitalist bloc.
Massively, yeah.
Overall, I'm really curious what you think about the prospects of socialism. Is there any hope for socialism making a comeback? Because it seems to me, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, feel free to give me hope, that socialism is not really seen as viable by many.
Yeah, let's hear the defense of socialism. Let's hear it. In India.
Well, no, I feel
or elsewhere, yeah.
Well, I feel like after independence, India's kind of Jawaharlal Nehru and kind of the leading members of the Indian independence movement had a very optimistic socialist mentality when they put together the constitution, and it was very hopeful. And I think to a certain extent that's really been that was massively diminished when India's economy was liberalized in 1991 because of its huge economic crisis, and then it had to take structural adjustment loans from the World Bank, which, leads us to where we're at now, which is like there's no sign of socialism. Yeah.
Okay.
It's all just kind of, there might be socialist rhetoric. There might be rhetoric that, because there's still a massive poor population.
Is that socialist rhetoric always populist?
I think that's a much bigger, different question.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
You don't have to answer it. Well, I just need to make one kind of, not a disclaimer, but kind of clarification. When we say socialism, we don't specifically mean Marxism, Leninism. We don't specifically mean Soviet communism.
Well, actually, what do we mean? I mean, maybe we can ask that to me.
I mean it in a broad sense.
Okay.
Socialism, basically the fight for, or fight actually doesn't sound right, the
Well, it's a
struggle
fight,
for the underrepresented, disenfranchised, working class people most of the time, but not just working class people, groups, minority groups, women, very
Universal
important.
healthcare, universal education.
Universal healthcare, universal education, progressive taxation, taxing the rich, etc., etc. Yeah.
So if we have all that, for example, if we have all of that in Vietnam, is it the model socialist society?
Well, I wouldn't say, it's the goal, right? It's the goal towards, equality for all, right? Yet, we, in our rhetoric, right, we are progressively, gradually transitioning to an ideal model of, socialist society. Unlike China claims that it is, its version of socialism is the primary stage. In Vietnam, we have this, I would coin our approach as this pragmatic gradualism. Like we take a more, humble approach.
Can you explain? Yeah, sorry, you're doing
it.
No
worries. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a unique, a combination that evolves through years and decades of, experience and adaptation, right? It combines market mechanisms with socialist principles. Some might say that it's not possible, but from what I can see from in Vietnam, it's quite an interesting development, and I think it represents, one of the experiences that you can look at and see, wow, okay, that's not, actually not that far off. When people talk about this particular model, they often look to the Nordic countries, right? Social democracy, and there's a great combination of higher institutions emboldening the people. The socialist-oriented aspect of our economy emphasizes social equity, right? Public welfare, and ensures that the economic growth benefits all segments of society, not just the working class, but everybody can, participate and benefit from it. There's a strong investment in education and healthcare and infrastructure, but the state, the authority, right, plays a strategic role in guiding development priorities, I'd say, and ensure that it is inclusive. So, for example, our land ownership, is land ownership, private land ownership a thing here in the UK?
A bit. Ask the royals.
It always has
Not
been.
just the royals, try to take a walk in the country.
Yeah.
Because, and this has been criticized. This has been criticized so widely, not just by socialists or leftists, because this country is basically, like walking rights. What do you call it? Walking rights?
Yeah.
Like,
Rights.
roaming rights, something like that. Where you
Right to roam.
right to roam. You really can't walk from A to B without having to cross somebody's private land,
Right.
because most of the land is owned privately in this country.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. So why do you ask?
Because, for example, right, I'm wondering about the concept, because in where I come from, our land ownership system maintains a collective ownership, right? It allows the using rights to be traded, balancing these economic efficiency models with social principles, right?
Can you give us an example? Because it's all very abstract to me now.
Right.
So how does that ownership work? When you say exchange, when you say, how is it like? Are you allowed to own a plot of land?
Yes and no. So the land is under your name with your use, but ultimately it belongs to the government.
Okay.
So if I have a plot of land, which is in my name in legal terms, it's still owned by the government, but I can distribute and trade my right to use it for either one of you for a price.
Yeah.
And it has to be registered by the government.
I don't know if you like this comparison. Tell me if you don't. But this is like Japan.
Yeah, exactly. It is,
because
yeah.
all
Land
the
for
land,
Reformation,
all the
yeah.
land belonged to the emperor.
Yeah.
I'm talking even Meiji period Japan.
Absolutely. Post-war land ownership, reform
Yeah.
is the single most important part
Absolutely.
of Japanese democracy.
It's always overlooked, but this is probably the biggest reason why communism didn't really fly in Japan after the war. One of the biggest, not the only biggest reason, communists actually really did shoot themselves in the foot in Japan. If you ask me, I mean, I can give you a lecture on this. I won't. But land reform, incredibly important reform. More important, if you ask me, than democratization reforms. More important than monetary reforms of the Dodge line. More important than demilitarization, etc., etc. But let's not talk too much about Japan.
Well, so isn't that how it worked in the UK as well, with the aristocracy holding large plots of land and
Still
then
does.
smaller? Yeah. and
Still
then
does.
small-
That's the difference. Because
Right.
in
Still
Japan, in
But
45,
then smaller
you had this.
people would have smaller
Yes.
farmers.
But it's
would-
hence the John Lennon line. You think you're so classless and clever and free, but you're still peasants as far as I can see.
Yeah.
It's exactly that. That's what he's mocking.
So one of the things that we can talk about this for a long time, but one thing that didn't happen in the UK is that aggressive, often violent redistribution of wealth, which happened, say, in China. We know how it happened. In the Soviet Union, we know how it happened. Even in non-communist, non-socialist
You had that
societies
in
like
Norwich,
Japan
though,
and
didn't you,
Germany.
a little bit. You had Ket.
Oh yeah,
With Ket's
and you know
Trail
what
and
happened to Ket?
household.
You know,
Yeah,
you know
yeah.
how Ket ended up.
I know, but that was kind of a violent peasants' revolt, wasn't it? And that
Yes,
was
I mean there were many peasants. Well, the
well-organised.
famous German Peasants' War, all kinds of things, which usually in what we know as the capitalist world, and this is something that I want to throw back to you, and I will also let Ra to come back, because what we just heard from Min about the socialist model.
Throw back to Anuradha. No need to come back to me.
One of the socialist,
Now
one
go,
of the
Ra.
socialist models that exist. I'm really curious about the Indian, specifically what you study, Modi's model of,
Yeah.
or maybe if you want, you can bring in your own research and tell us how the think tanks help justify or help, kind of rationalize all of that in front of the public. But what is the difference between, say, a country like India, which had, you would argue, most of the prerequisites for becoming a truly socialist country, most of, if not all the prerequisites, large population, working class, mainly agricultural, I mean, you name it, all socialist friendly, or not necessarily socialists themselves, but socialist friendly leadership or elite. I'm now actually researching Indian communists and Indian socialists.
Oh,
People
are
like
you?
Chattopadhyay,
Nice.
Comrade Chatto, M.N. Roy. I'm writing a book where there will be a chapter about the Indian socialists. And interestingly, a lot of that the Communist Party of India, where it was established?
Where?
In Tashkent, where I come from.
Oh.
This is like really interesting
Amazing.
history of all of that. But I really want to look. I want to hear your thoughts about the other side, the not only anti-socialist side of India.
I mean, I think a good way of thinking about it, contemporary politics, is the BJP, right, which is the current ruling party in India. Modi is the prime minister, the leader, etc. He, when I was doing interviews for my book, I interviewed an MP who told me that kind of all throughout the 90s, post-liberalization, the BJP's, party headquarters would have these internal talks about, like, how can we present our economic policy in a way that most people can get behind? Because the fact is that the people who support the BJP and the BJP themselves are not a monolith. There are people on all ends of the ideological, political, economic spectrum who support it and who are a part of it. So what this guy, my interviewee, told me is that what they ended up, because in the past they've had a range of different economic policies that support small, medium enterprises, then ones that support larger corporations, and then switch back to the small and medium enterprises and, try and give them, try and invest in them from the government, etc. So it kind of goes all over the map. what he said was that because there was never any consensus on that, we had to have the social part be a consensus. And I put that in quotes because when I asked, what do you mean by that? He means, well, that we're fundamentally a Hindu nationalist party. So, that becomes kind of a unifying logic when there's so much contradiction when it comes to other kinds of pure economic
Right. So
policies.
is that not also related, going back to the earlier point, on land policy in India? I mean, how does that work? Because is it the case that people don't have their own plot of land, so they aren't able to, if you like, marketize, that ability to wield any sort of political power or influence? Like, are they disempowered because they have no right to land, so they have no land to property, so they no longer have a means by which to engage? You can't say, oh yeah, but you're all going to have your own plot of land or whatever. So religion is a way of bypassing the fact that you basically got, for want of a better expression, kind of peasant population mostly.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting question. I think that ownership of the means of production has always been a big question, particularly in kind of rewriting laws when it comes to like post-colonial countries. And yeah, I mean, that's an argument to be made, that you offer kind of religious ideological unification when you can't provide means of reliable sustenance and security,
Right.
and you can't actually provide the means for people to better their lives in a material way.
And that goes back to your point, Shez, that on Japanese land reform, it seems a sudden jump, but it's true, right? Because that's exactly what happened in Japan. People were given, basically, suddenly a market was created where people actually own shit, like nobody owns anything.
Absolutely. And you know what? It was a very smart decision on the side of the U.S. occupation policy, U.S. occupation administration. And, the fact that there was U.S. occupation administration actually enables this kind of radical change, because that's one of the differences between this country and this country, which has never been occupied, as far as I know. I don't know.
I think by the Normans in 1066.
Yes,
okay.
I'm talking more about the
recent.
modern period. But I still want to go back to my question, which, I mean, it's not unanswered, but I want you to have one more shots, both of you. I mean, I sound like
We still don't know who rules the world.
like your professor. No, my question was, is there any hope for socialism?
Go on, Min, you answer first. As the man who probably closer to the socialist heart, or maybe not, as we've just found out. Go on.
Yes.
Yes.
Well, it's not rather than a one-size-fits-all approach, right? They have to recognize that sustainable development requires models tailored to local contexts, right? The Nordic countries shows how social welfare can coexist with market efficiency.
Yeah, okay. Sorry to cut you off again for a second, but then that makes it sound like you're saying that Vietnam is using the Nordic countries as more of a model than, say, China. And we tend to associate China more with socialism than the Nordic countries, albeit that they are socially democratic nominally, no?
It's less about, who's following who, but rather it's learning from the experiences.
Right.
Because there is, we have this little reform policy, which is called đổi mới, right? It's a little translation to English as reform, renovation rather. It's a renovation reform policy happening in the 1980s.
Can you say it again?
10 years. Renovation.
In Vietnamese.
Đổi mới.
Okay.
There's no...
I would like to see the characters, because I think there's something like maybe in Japanese also, like a very similar term.
Yeah.
But yeah, go on.
There's no direct translation for it into, proper English. There's still, debate amongst the translation community. But it is essentially a whole reform process of, of how we govern our economy. So some will say that we took the experience from the Chinese 10 years earlier, because that's exactly what they did, right? They opened up their economy to, invite foreign investment, to create, the flow of goods into and out of the country. But I would say that, it's not mix and stir. You have to tailor it to, local institutions. So, for example, Ho Chi Minh mentioned the idea of loyalty and filial piety, I would say. He translated it to the loyalty to your country and this, willingness. If you are a Vietnamese national, you have to serve the people. You have, whether you are, whether you live amongst the people you're serving, it's a communal sense. that you have to achieve. So it's not just the Nordic model. We can see how Singapore, right? It's a market economy, but it shows how state involvement can drive innovation.
Or South Korea.
Okay.
Oh yeah.
Or Japan in the 60s, MITI and others, yeah.
So are you in agreement with this, Anuradha? I mean, is there still hope for socialism? And if so, should we as academics be playing a role in that?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I mean, I think just to kind of pivot to combine a few of your previous questions a little bit, if we're talking about kind of ownership of means of production, right, and we're talking about knowledge economy, that really shifts the terrain of how we produce what we consume. And I think partly, we're shifting so much from human workers to kind of more machine augmented knowledge production, automation, prediction, and
AI.
yeah, AI
Yeah.
plays a huge role in this context. So, I think it reframes knowledge a bit more as pattern recognition and productivity as scale. And so what happens then is the knowledge economy that we were talking about before, it's been rebranded and subsumed into data capitalism, which is more extractive, automated, depersonalized.
So that doesn't sound very hopeful.
No,
Really interesting
genuinely not.
point. Having established all the kind of foundational, fundamental academic topics, I suggest we take a quick break, come back and talk about what next. Because we talked about socialism, and kind of from my own viewpoint, the socialists' usual enemies or usual rivals would be like Milton Friedman, the Margaret Thatcher, the Chicago School, which are still quite popular, especially in my country. You need to see some of the books that are being translated into Uzbek.
Did I show you my Washington Consensus tattoo?
You should. But after the break, shall we talk about the new threats to the truth, to the world, in the sense that we can talk about things like AI, we can talk about techno-feudalism, we can talk about new forms of ownership. So let's take a quick break and come back.
See you in 30.
This is a quick message about postdoc visas. Postdoc Visas is a new immigration consultancy led by Graeme Ross, who has 20 plus years of immigration legal experience, of which 13 years he spent assisting postdocs and academics at the University of Cambridge. Despite its name, Postdoc Visas doesn't cater only to postdocs or PhD students. Anybody who needs professional advice and very helpful, tailored support when it comes to immigration advice can get in touch with Graeme, and we will leave his email address in the description below. And one thing I would like to add, that Graeme offers preferential rates for postdocs, and he's generally very helpful and very supportive, and as someone who's benefited greatly from his advice, I would highly recommend Graeme Ross and Postdoc Visas. Thank you.
Okay, welcome back. So maybe in this part, we're going to switch gears a little bit and think about what we're going to do about all of this stuff, and particularly about the transformation of the knowledge economy, but also this, whatever it is. If we think of socialism as something positive, then what are the big threats to it now, and how do we counter those threats?
Yeah. Are we talking about vulture capitalism? Are we talking about this new, there are so many terms like techno-feudalism, which I don't buy 100%, but it is a very appealing idea, Yanis Varoufakis' idea, techno-feudalism, where basically ownership is changed. So you no longer own the things that you buy.
So how do we respond to that?
Yeah, so what is going to happen to the world amid these new challenges to the welfare of the many, not the few, to use a Labour Party slogan of the past?
Yeah, I think it's really important as academics to be able to say, I don't know.
Kudos to you for that.
In principle, I think it's really important to say that and to admit that. But I think it's really confronting a crisis of legitimacy in public institutions, and that's been ongoing. That's not new. But I think it really just kind of all of the new threats demand rethinking in how public institutions present themselves and how they reason through and engage with publics. I think as academics, we probably have somewhat of a role to play in that without falling into kind of a savior
Is
narrative.
that role bigger in your thinking or not so big compared to the think tanks?
Yeah, I think think tanks are massively influenced in many cases, though not all, by who funds them.
Yeah.
So we always have to look at where the funding comes from, and you always have to trace that.
Okay, another question. Sorry.
Well, this is
Sorry
the great
to
thing about the University of East
Sorry
Anglia.
to dominate.
We are
Yes.
less directly funded.
Less
Yes.
directly funded, yes.
Sorry to again ask you which is bigger, which is more important.
Yeah.
Because, think tanks, especially right-wing think tanks, have been incredibly also important in this country. And you know
Hugely.
this very
Yes,
well.
yeah.
But my kind of impression, maybe I'm wrong, because I don't really look into think tanks in any detail, but my impression was ideology was more important than who funds them. Because if you look at the right-wing think tanks in this country, right-wing think tanks especially in America, American Enterprise Institute, Heritage Foundation, you name it, those people, yes, money is there, money is important for anyone. Like if you're left-wing, you're right-wing, you need to have funding in this world especially. But does that not throw out
Yeah, I don't think
ideology
they're
as a
mutually
factor?
exclusive. I mean, I think that...
Which one is more important? That's my question.
I don't know. I think the premise is kind of flawed there because it's a feedback system, right?
Okay.
I mean, think tanks, particularly if we're thinking of the big ones that Thatcher set up when she was around in the UK, which, played a big role. The Tony Blair Institute, which is playing a huge role in tech policy in the UK now. I think they present themselves, they present particular attitudes towards what policy priorities ought to be. And then the kind of corporations and people or individuals, companies that support that, fund them. And I think then they tend to have more say into what kind of direction the think tanks take in the future.
All right. Sorry to interrupt. I've got a question. Do you think the knowledge economy succeeded too well? Because knowledge work now, right? It became so ubiquitous, right? Instead of talking about the knowledge economy, it is now just the economy.
Yeah.
And I think it's created its own. I think it's created its own problems, right? We got information overload, we've got digital divides, we've got the commodification of knowledge itself.
Yeah.
So, do you think that it succeeded too well?
I don't know if success is how I would frame that. And I think it was framed as kind of this liberal optimist view of the future, of how we might conceive and engage with knowledge and the production and consumption of it, and that's not really where we're at.
Okay, over to you, Ra.
Yeah, I was just thinking about, we seem to have a lot of answers for what happened.
Yeah.
But this is a classic academic issue. But, we don't have a great predictive power. We don't have a great kind of vision for the future.
Here
I
you
can't
can.
imagine.
In the podcast, you can predict. It's
Yeah.
okay. You're not writing a paper. Come on.
Okay,
Three
so
of the
we
four
can
of us
put
have
out
got
our
kids,
manifestos.
Right? Yeah, right, exactly.
Please do.
I mean, we've
Right.
kind of, most of us have got, what's the word? Not an investment. That's definitely the wrong word. But we've got like a stake in the game here.
Yeah.
So how do we see like our kids dealing with this in, 10, 15, 20 years' time? It seems to me like we're in a kind of a...
Dealing with what exactly?
with the current
with
ruling of the world. Like, everything I've heard this afternoon has basically led me to the conclusion that, there's no empowerment of the individual, right? There's no means to counter an increasing concentration of power.
I'll play the devil's advocate here.
Okay.
And I will still and being the devil's advocate in this case is not that hard, because all I'm going to do is I'm going to just kind of ask you to take another look and also look at some of the positives. Okay. For example, we started talking about the distribution of knowledge. And in our lifetime, in the last 20 years since internet became a thing, and then in the last 15 years when these things became...
Smartphones.
Yeah, became a thing in the sense that, yes, it created lots of problems, mental health problems. Jonathan Haidt, we quote him quite a lot. But at the same time, imagine, in historic terms, This might even be more important than, the invention of the wheel, or as important as fire and wheel. In 1 decade, the majority of people on the planet have access, almost instant access.
To a smartphone.
To not a smartphone, because smartphone is a tool. Yes, it is a tool. It can be a tool for you. It can be a tool for the social media companies. It's more of a tool for social media companies that then use that to kind of make money off you. But at the same time, if you look at the positives, you can also see that the fact that you can do so many things, even in my own life when I used to live in Uzbekistan, if I wanted to buy a book in English, I couldn't. You had to go to a specific bookshop. You had to pay truckloads of money for one novel in English.
Right. I mean, you're nodding. This is your experience as well?
But now, all you need is a phone. You just download it from Amazon. Yes, I did criticize Amazon's model, technofeudalism. You buy a book on Kindle and you don't own it. But in the meantime, you can still read it, and you can read it for years. So there are also positives.
Okay.
Feel free to
I'm
comment me
curious.
now.
I mean, Min, you were nodding. Is that because you were agreeing? Yeah, this is the way forward, and you were talking about balanced development, and it's just a matter of proper management, and then we're all going to have a wonderful kind of bright future in which we're empowered and rich and happy, or are there kind of underlying problems here?
Well, too many cooks spoil the broth.
Right.
But one of the things I would argue with today's economy is the fact that what Shurjaz has mentioned, it didn't happen to me, but happened to my superiors, right?
Okay.
To my teachers, to my mom, to my parents' generations back in the day. They were talking about how difficult it was to access, literature, to access academia, back then when, things were not as developed as it is today. I would say that it's easier for me in my 30s to achieve a PhD more than, people of your caliber. I would say caliber, right? To achieve.
Not sure I have a caliber, but
to achieve a PhD in your 40s or 50s, right? Because back in the day, right, it's not, the access to information isn't as abundant as it is now with a smartphone, with Amazon books and Kindles. If I want to, take a look at the book right now, I don't have to physically go to the library and physically request for it. I can just, look for it on the internet, either download it, illegally, or as to pay respect to the efforts that the people have written it to.
You have access. That's all that matters.
That's
you
the
have
thing.
more access
Exactly.
to knowledge, and knowledge, as philosophers have been saying, and this is, I'm gonna again direct this to Anuradha. Knowledge is power, or knowledge can be power. At least knowledge can open doors for you. Knowledge can empower you to make educated decisions, or to even actually fight for your own rights.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's definitely great hope in kind of the future of technology, but I think there needs to be clear regulations on tech companies. Tech companies can't be overtaking and making policy, directing what matters when it comes to what governments ought to make policies about and what matters to people's lives.
that's what they're already doing.
That's what they're already doing,
Yeah.
exactly,
So
and that's
how
what
do-
needs to be different. I mean,
Yeah.
I think when it comes to the actual tech, studying AI, even though I'm somewhat skeptical about how it's being mobilized and how it's being glorified, right? The AI hype is massive. It's everywhere, and we really need to be skeptical of that. But there are so many times when I use an AI tool and I'm like, this is incredible.
Yeah.
For sure. We
My
have
thoughts
that kind
exactly.
Of,
Why
that
should
kind
we
of,
be so
wonder
positive?
about
Why
it.
should we worry so much about it when it actually
because of all of the stuff that's happening behind the scenes. The actual tech isn't necessarily being used in the ways that we might perceive it to be used in.
I mean, and that's so if that's being used covertly or maliciously, and as you're saying, I couldn't agree more, right? We need some kind of regulation. Somebody has to have a handle on this. Otherwise, tech companies, which are a few companies,
Yeah, it's a handful.
Right, handful.
Yeah.
most of them
Amazon,
based in
most of
Silicon
them in the
Valley.
US.
Yeah.
And they kind of, people talk about the tech bros, right? They don't come from a culture of kind of positivity, equality, lots of the things that we'd aspire to generally. They come from a culture of kind of, what should we say,
Power.
fratern,
There was a time,
power,
right, you will remember this. There was a time, and I was one of the early adopters. Almost every social media, every technology I remember I actually opened a Facebook account when you needed to have a university email to open a Facebook account.
Yeah, I
And
got one because my brother sent me an invitation and he was at
or,
Yale.
or somebody sends you an invitation. But my kind of thing is even before that, even an invitation wouldn't help you. I had a Manchester University email and I could open it. So I have. There was a time where was this positive vibe when you could think. It's not just you read the Newsweek or Time magazine or Financial Times where they sing the praises of t-shirt wearing Mark Zuckerberg or Sergey Brin and the other guy who founded Google, who are so down to earth guys, billionaires, but working and Google working for the good of the humanity. But that thing is completely gone now, especially with Trump's re-election. You saw all of those tech billionaires lined up, and those tech bros. On one hand, you can talk about the Rishi Sunak kind of view of the world, where and Rishi Sunak he was a well-meaning guy.
Other politicians are available.
They are, but I mean, let me just kind of make a point, because Rishi Sunak's ideal, as far as I understand it, ideal society is a technocratic society where people who are qualified, experts, whatever you call them, people who have the experience, wherewithal, but very importantly, funding, the money, can work together to create a better. I'm not actually. He doesn't pay me. I'm not making. This is how I think he imagines the world, and in a way, that's not necessarily a bad thing. But I still think that the luster has come off lately in the last, especially since Trump's inauguration. People like Zuckerberg, Amazon guy Bezos, and others. Musk especially. Yeah. So. In a way, yes, I'm less optimistic about technology. Although I'm playing the devil's advocate and kind of trying to remind you of the good things.
Okay. Well, let's. I think we're running short of time, but let's let Min and Anuradha have a last word on this.
On this, yeah.
Who rules the world, and what's the hope for them or for us? Min?
Well, the ones who wields the knowledge rules the world, right? Knowledge can be used for the greater good, but it can also be weaponized.
AI wields the knowledge now.
Yeah, but machine learning and artificial intelligence is the next evolution, rather than the death of knowledge-based economics and how we run the world.
So you're overall optimistic, like
overall
me.
optimistic.
You think that AI? I mean, this is what I think. AI will change the world, but not completely turn it on its head. AI will coexist with humans. Maybe I'm being too optimistic.
It boils down.
I hope AI that you won't kill me when the time comes.
Okay, this will never be deleted from the internet.
Yeah.
Okay, Anuradha, what do you think?
Well, I mean, AI is not sentient, right? Let's.
Not yet.
No.
Not,
I mean,
not
this
yet.
is like harkening back to sci-fi from the 70s and 80s. There's always been a current of dystopian fiction running through the way that we imagine, the way that we imagine artificial intelligence, and what it can be. What was I going to say? AI is not going to destroy us, but it really matters how we use it and like who uses it and who has control over it. But I think that, for academics, it's not going to be like having more facts or better facts that are going to make us more relevant. I think it's legitimacy to a large extent. It's trust, a lack of it, and that makes sense. Academia has been steeped in elitism and jargon. There's a lot of gatekeeping to how people access academic knowledge. So I think what's important for us is to make our knowledge more accessible, to be able to explain things in ways, explain complex, not to, I don't think that everything needs to be easy to read, right? I don't think that we need to boil everything we do and think down to bite-sized pieces of easily
Well, AI will do it for us.
Yeah, but what I mean is AI picks certain things and makes certain things more intelligible, removes nuance, removes contradiction. It tends to just make just like a pile of consensus.
It's also maybe too tailored. Do you know what? Do you mean that? Because it kind of really studies you really well. It knows you very well, and that is one of the scary things about it. But at the same time, it tailors all of its responses to you.
Oh, yeah.
And you kind of end up in a kind of a chamber, echo chamber, where the AI gives you what you want, and you kind of build a very narrow, a very kind
That's
of
also very
compartmentalized view of the world.
Yeah, I mean, it will respond to you. Well, LLMs anyway will respond to you telling you exactly what you want to hear, and it'll say the opposite of what it just said if it thinks that's what you are asking for.
Yeah.
Anyway, my
Can I ask
takeaway is...
one last? Well, I know that you want us to stop.
I would love you to continue.
I want one last question, which is kind of a change of subject. I think we've had enough discussion about all the isms, all the competing isms, all the ideologies, the role of knowledge, etc. I want you to be more practical because both of you, myself included, and Ra is also, Ra is based in his home country now, but Ra was also once an international student.
I was.
So a lot of our audience is either international students or students who want to become international students in this country, in Japan, in America, anywhere. So what would you, considering everything we said about the future, the technology, the ideology, the post-truth, the AI, all of the challenges, what would you recommend that the young people who are listening to us, and if you're still listening to us, kudos to you, think about when in their future studies? What should they study, or what should they take into account? Maybe are there any areas, or maybe are there things that they need to avoid based on your own experience as international students now or in the past? That's a big question.
Well,
You do it since you're currently an international student.
okay. Well, there's a trope that back in the days, right, in where I come from, economics and business, it was going up, and it was basically selling like hotcakes, right? If you can guarantee to have a job, that's what most employers say. You can guarantee to have a job if you have a degree in business, in marketing, or in anything that's non-social science. In the post-truth world, where everybody can say anything to anybody saying anything, then I would say, one of the things that I was, I never thought of going to the UK initially.
Where did you want to go?
The United States.
Oh yeah, a lot of people do.
Strange choice.
Yeah.
Now, when I reflect back on my decision, it was a strange choice. But one of the things that drew me to the UK was the fact that it's, as a young person, like 10 years ago, I would love the vibrance. I would love to explore the world in all of its colors. But right now, as I grow up, I just realized that, I want a more tranquil, a more friendly, a more toned down version of this vibrance, because if you eat too much salt, you're going to get thirsty.
Which
right?
to all of our listeners is Norwich, Norfolk.
Hey,
Yeah.
Norwich is very vibrant.
Anuradha,
Very
you want to say
vibrant.
anything on that?
I think in general to students, I just think, you want to sharpen your critical thinking skills every chance you get. And all of the disciplines that we teach here at UEA help you do that in different ways. And that's really going to help you be able to recognize what kinds of knowledge you're accessing, to be able to explain the context in which they emerge, which I think is more important than saying this is truth and this is not truth, rather than understanding where they come from and why they appeal and resonate with so many different kinds of people.
Oh, that's a great answer.
Right.
Unlike Min, you did study in the United States, yeah?
Min has a comeback for that.
Because you're also wearing a Minnesota shirt. I
Yeah.
just noticed.
That's true.
Min, go on. You had an extra point to add to that.
It's all right. Just having one extra point, because at home I'm also serving, as one of the teaching professionals in a certain institution. Students should understand that they should approach everything with an open mind, right? Regarding everything that they do. There are certain biases, and they understand that there are, contradicting opinions and differing point of views, but people tend to follow something that have been nuanced. They've been, indulging for their entire life. So one of the things that I would say is that you got to approach this with an open mind, right? You got to learn to take a look from different perspectives, right? Sounds like a very simple thing to say, but surprisingly, many won't get it or won't try to get it. So one of the things I've learned here at UEA is the fact that there are multiple perspectives to be taken into account when it comes to a certain issue, right? It's not a deadlock. It's not a fixed point. It's, you got to take a look from different angles to think critically in your words. And it's not just,
We need to let you ride around the streets of Norwich and project that everywhere.
Sounded like nobody knows anything. Do what you want. Which is not bad advice, is it?
It's not bad advice at all.
Yeah.
And on that marvellous advice, I think we will wrap up today's show.
No football talk today, although I
There
just
is a-
found out that Min is a fellow supporter of
Manchester United. There you go. Even though we don't talk about.
we can, but not today.
Not
we,
today.
We continue to fight and hope for lost causes.
And maybe there will be a day
Maybe Manchester United, there will be a day when they will.
when the cause is finally lost. So, on that note, we'll say a final huge thank you to our two guests,
Yes.
Anuradha and Min. Thank you both very much.
Thank you.
Thank you for
Amazing
having
conversation.
us.
I think we had a good conversation. I really enjoyed your answers, both of you,
Yeah.
and your perspectives.
And to those who've just tuned in, scroll back, obviously, and
Just
listen to the whole-
tuning in, right?
we will continue to bring our students and colleagues and talk about all the things that,
Like,
that matter.
subscribe, and watch as much as you can.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you very much.
Thank you.
This podcast has been produced with support from the Faculty of Arts and Humanities at the University of East Anglia, UEA. The hosts are grateful to the UEA Media Production team. Technical assistance has been kindly provided by the technicians at the UEA Media Suite, who have also engineered and edited this episode. The views expressed in this podcast belong solely to those who express them and do not represent the views of the university or its affiliates.